And now we will move on to hear from Marilyn Magoon, our governing board member.
Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. My husband and I had the pleasure of hosting the speaker and her husband several years ago. She was introduced at the Waterman Town Hall Series for giving back for the Waterman Scholarship she had received. She was also the winner of the Julie Emanuel Scholarship from Henderson House, which helped during medical school, and she is currently a member of Waterman. A few things about her. In 1969 was a tumultuous time in the United States and at the University of Michigan. Opportunities for women and minorities were opening, but many hurdles remained. This was a time when Patricia Magle came from Caledonia, a small village in southwest Michigan, a '69 graduate from the class of only 120 students to the U of M. Henderson House helped young women get over some hurdles, and Pat was one of those young women who came to Henderson House during her second semester. Pat completed a degree in zoology and was admitted to the University of Michigan Medical School, earning her MD in 1977. She specialized in family practice, now called family medicine. At the end of her residency near Chicago, she met Jim Jones. They married, had 2 children that they are most proud of, and 2 grandchildren who keep them very busy. In 1983, they moved to rural Iowa, where Pat served as a family practice physician for over 30 years. Her practice spanned from prenatal to nursing home and hospice. She delivered babies, and she had lots of emergency room and hospital practice over the years. She was instrumental in starting and was the first medical director of the community health centers of southern Iowa. She and her husband retired in 2014, but she continues being involved on different boards that are in service to the community and the region. You may be surprised to know that in retirement, she and her husband started bicycling. And for 5 years, in the heat of July, they biked with 20,000 others across Iowa in what they call rag-by. Please welcome Dr. Patricia Magle Jones, who will speak on From Kent State to Streaking, Living at Henderson House during the 1970s. Thank you. Pat, go blue.
Thank you, Marilyn. I'm going to switch to my notes. Does everyone hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because I want to tell you about my home that I had for 3.5 years while at college and what it meant to me. I was what they called a small town valedictorian. And when I heard that, it didn't sound complimentary. It sounded very rustic and naive. I was a first generation college student. In my extended family, it was a big deal to graduate from high school. I came to Michigan with a lot of determination, curiosity, excitement, and nervous energy, and I was 17 years old. My initial worry was that the classes would be too much for me, but while I found the classes really stretched me, I enjoyed them and did okay. My housing situation was something else. My first Michigan home in fall of 1969 was Mary Markley Hall. It was huge, it was noisy, it was 3/4 men. It was hard to sleep, so it's kind of a blur. I remember a football being thrown through our dorm room window one October afternoon. And of course, I found it impossible to study. I found the library like a lot of freshmen do. I had an incident in the Michigan League, falling asleep while studying in an armchair, and a nice lady I don't know if she woke me up, but she told me that I could go up to the library on the 3rd floor of the league. And that was my first introduction to the Alumni Council's work. Then in early 1970, in January, I had a classmate in chemistry class. Her name was Sue Singer, and she befriended me. She lived at Henderson House, and we got to visiting, and I was probably whining about my living situation. And she told me that they were short a resident to make the house work well, and would I be interested in moving? They didn't ordinarily ask freshmen, so I needed to have special permission. And I did receive that. And within a day or two, Sue and I were pushing 2 laundry carts packed with my belongings through the slush from Mary Markley Hall to 1330 Hill Street along Washtenaw Avenue. What I found then was that Henderson House was a house that looked like a house in a real neighborhood. We did normal things that I was familiar with. Such as cooking meals, eating meals family style. We washed dishes, cleaned bathrooms, and my favorite, scrubbing the stairs. That was a great stress reducer. We had a grand piano that they let us play from time to time and a 10-cent Coke machine in the laundry room. It was quiet and there were places I could study. That was so important to me. I made friends and study partners there, had fun and cheered each other on. Once I was doing a poor me bit and I didn't think I could do it. And I was probably worried about calculus class. And Sue Singer told me, Megs, you're going to medical school. We're going to do this together and you're going to do all right. And she was right. I felt like I belonged at Henderson. It was a refuge for me. There was stuff going on in Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan, and campuses across the nation then. I realized though, even at that time, that the most disruptive stuff was in my mind. I lacked confidence. I was so terrified that I'd flunk out or otherwise disgrace myself and have to go home. But there were some issues and trends active in my freshman year. There were the hippies. They were much of a threat to me, but I appreciated the relaxing change they brought to the dress code because I didn't have a lot of money for clothes. There was a tenants union and rent strike protesting high rents and poor quality apartments, and the first ever Earth Day concerned about environmental causes, pollution, and so on. But for me, even more disruptive events that were happening on campuses included the following. Anti-war activists were at work with the escalation of the Vietnam War into Cambodia and the use of chemical weapons, particularly napalm. There were various demonstrations periodically against the Vietnam War and the military-industrial complex. There was trashing of university buildings, especially the ROTC building and the chemistry building where I had classes every day. On occasion, there were confrontations with those trying to get to class. Protesters would get into my face upon entering the building. There was the Black Action Movement strike, which closed down the university in winter semesters. As this went on, the confrontations got more frequent and louder, more in your face. I was so perplexed because I was sympathetic to their cause. It seemed beyond unfair to me that there was such discrimination in admission to University of Michigan. I felt that I was no more qualified to be there than someone who grew up in Detroit. I didn't know what to do though. I didn't know what the right thing was. And I felt cowardly either way. There was also what was called Women's Lib. And there was a lighter hearted side of this, had to do with the dress code at Henderson at dinner. In solidarity with bra burning, and I'm aware that I need to possibly apologize to Helen Hill, who was there a few years before me. There were a couple of incidents in the Henderson dinner meal line where bras were removed and some of them were thrown on the buffet in the dining hall. I chickened out on that one. On the more serious side, at that time, women were in a minority at the university. And I remember harassment walking to class, which was experienced by my housemates and myself. Women had no varsity sports and were not even in the marching band. As I was accepted to medical school a couple years later, I first heard the "you are taking the place of a fine young man" quote. That was really puzzling to me. In the spring of 1973, some feminists staged a book burning on the Diag. This was a text of obstetrics and gynecology, and it was authored by a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Michigan Medical School. Later, this book was required reading during our gynecology rotations, so I bought it for that rotation a couple years later. And while I wasn't into burning books, this one was hard to read for me, as the views on the psychology of women were not compatible with what I thought of myself or any women that I knew, like my grandmother, my mother, sisters, housemates, and was really not useful to me as a developing physician. It's still available on Amazon.com for $200 the last time I checked. But back to the spring of 1970. Tensions on campus seemed real and high at the end of the term, the last week of April. We took our exams and went home before the end of the month. That was fortunate for us. After I was home, that first week of May, probably May 4th, there were the Kent State shootings. And the next day, May 5th, the iconic picture of those shootings was on the front page of the Grand Rapids Press and probably everywhere else in America. I thought, with a sinking feeling, that it could have been in Ann Arbor. I could have been shot just going to class. While at school, I could concentrate on my business. Being at home without being with my friends and my housemates, it worsened my fears. And I needed to make sense of all of it. And this led me to explore my faith and join my church. That helped me to clarify my vision of who I was, what I was about, and my goals for having an education. It increased my desire to go back to school at Michigan, and knowing that I had a good place to live while at school helped me. I found a congregation of my church in Ann Arbor that embraced me and me them. A lot of Michigan graduates went there. And I found I had friends in my church congregation living just a block away, leading to more social connections and ultimately to recruits for Henderson House. When streaking came in the mid-1970s, just after my Henderson years, it was a relief. It was so lighthearted. I was tempted to get into the fun, but didn't go there. Through all of this, Henderson felt a safe place. We discussed the events of the day, big and small. We could disagree with each other and still work together. After medical school and residency, as a family physician, I moved to Southern Iowa with my young family and started my career as a rural family physician. I was possibly the first female medical doctor, MD, in a multi-county area around me. As family physicians like to say, I did it all, from delivering babies to hospice care, plus college health at a small university in our town. There, in my college health practice, I realized that the first year away from home at college is a time of tremendous change for most college freshmen, even traumatic. And the unrest like what we had experienced in the 1970s, or 9/11 perhaps, or this pandemic, just add to the stress and anxiety. I can't imagine being in Henderson House and not being able to do something like scrub the stairs to get rid of my nervous energy. My sense of gratitude increased for what had been done for me and so many others through scholarships, grants, affordable loans, housing like Henderson House, social support that I found in Ann Arbor. And in response, I wanted to pass it on. So for one thing, I became a preceptor for medical students and other students in healthcare. Often they would stay at our house with my family if they were from out of town. As a Michigan alum, I joined the Waterman Group as a sustaining contributor. I don't have an alumni group around where I live, and they adopted me. I kept in touch with Henderson to see how things were going. And it seemed that things were changing with the times, but they were doing okay. My sister was there in the 80s, had her wedding reception there at the house. In the 90s, I went back to the Henderson Society of Henderson Women things, and a couple other times I came back. At one time, I went to a volleyball game. Michigan was playing Iowa, as I remember, and they had a pep band playing. And I had a couple of incidents through the years, meeting people who, especially in the 90s, interest seemed high about the affirmative action program as implemented at Michigan in the 70s. We experienced some backlash from while in Wyoming from a couple who had graduated from University of Michigan in the early 60s. But I had a heartwarming and encouraging encounter with a colleague, a Black African-American physician who actually practiced here for a few years in Lamoni, Iowa. And he grew up in Ann Arbor at the time I was there in the 70s. And we figured out that he was in middle school about the time I was at college. And his memories of that time were very heartwarming to me and encouraging. He remembers as a middle school kid that it was a time of the Black Action Movement was a time of hope and a happy time. It helped me to realize that he saw that in such a positive way, and it wasn't as traumatic for him as it seemed to me to be at the time. With this assignment and with so much time to reflect about the events of my freshman year, I realized that the issues of 1970 live on, are still relevant. Regarding women's health, we have women in medical school now. Maybe they don't have to keep their marriages secret like a classmate of mine did. And maybe we have convinced the gynecologists that menstrual cramps are not a neurotic problem. It's not in your head. But there are still problems with access to healthcare, domestic violence, sexual harassment. And turning to the Black Lives Matter movement and what it is working for, racial justice, combating racial profiling and the like, my sense of perplexity is changing to hope. I observe that many of us, and I'm talking about pretty white bread Southern Iowa here, are working to change our hearts and make real progress. I pray that we can change enough and soon. Yet another cause that started back then, Earth Day, has changed into a big movement with concerning the environment and climate change. But I would like to just state that here in Iowa, we are enjoying the return of the bald eagle, which were nearly extinct in the 70s. And that came from that movement and discovery that it was DDT that was making him die off. The tenants union continues to be relevant to me. In my post medical working life, I find myself on 2 housing boards with subsidies from HUD and the USDA. And I can attest that affordable, good housing and appropriate housing continues to be a problem. It wasn't an issue then as much, but an emerging issue is educational debt, which for many has grown to fantastic proportions. It is a game changer for many people or young people who wish to further the education, but do not have a lot of wealth. The Alumni Council has existed since 1917 to promote the interests of women in the Michigan community. It is as relevant today as ever. I am grateful and proud of this organization for the many services to Michigan women like myself, including the founding and sustaining of the Michigan League, the establishing and sustaining of Henderson House, and the generous scholarships that you administer to students of need and merit. You made a huge difference in my life, and I suspect the lives of many. Happy 75th birthday to Henderson, and my best wishes to all Henderson hens, past, present, and future. My commendation to Henderson and the Alumni Council. You continue to be the leaders and the best. Go Blue.
Thank you, Dr. Magle Jones. Thank you so much for that entertaining and enlightening speech. We learned so much.